Hey guys, this is Robert Ewens, the Ageless Wonder. Just want to do this comprehensive video that will show my entire trip and we'll hit all the numbers also. So, after doing all the calculations, I lost my first chart plotter in a wreck in South Carolina, so I had to get another one. So, I lost a lot of data, but I was able to go reconstruct that data and get you some good numbers. So my total miles for the trip were 4,627. Now, that surprised me because I really expected it was going to be closer to 4,800. But in analyzing my trip, I see where I cut off a lot of miles. I cut off with that direct crossing of the Gulf, which I expected to, but I saved a lot of time in Lake Erie by doing a direct crossing, kind of following the north bank of Lake Erie. And then on Lake Michigan, I saved a ton of miles being able to just basically run a straight line to Chicago, not having to follow either the east or west bank. So I think that's where I saved about 150, 160 miles. So I'm kind of now thinking if you could run the East Coast is a direct line, not having to do a bunch of the inside waterway like I had to do. Um, I think that you could probably do this in around 4,500 miles, maybe 4,400 miles. But yeah, it's always surprises me things on the Great Loop. So the total number of fuel stops I did during the trip was 12. That's kind of what I expected. I maybe thought I could get away with one or two less, um, but I stopped where it was advantageous. My average mile per gallon over the entire trip was about 8.5 miles per gallon. And that was probably a little bit lower than I anticipated, but man, a lot of that time in the Great Lakes and offshore, I was fighting some seas, and that hurt my gas mileage because I can regularly get 10 or 11 in calm water, and way better than that with current on the Mississippi River. But 8.5 was what I ended up averaging. Total gallons burned was 544 gallons. My total dollar cost was $3,130 for fuel. Total number of nights, and you'll get to see where each one of those nights were in the video, 19. I went through a total of 65 locks. My average time through the locks was 24 minutes per lock, which surprised me. I got through that quickly as an average. But yeah, through the Erie Canal, I think it's around 17 minutes average per lock. That's pretty quick. On the Mississippi, I averaged like an hour 30 a lock. Because I got stuck at Alton for a couple of hours. I was able to actually run Chain of Rocks, so that got my average back down after losing 2.5 hours at Alton. I had a similar situation. My average through the Illinois was around 30 minutes. I had one really long one, but I got to go over the dam on the last one just because the water was high. So yeah, so that average of 24 minutes was, I thought, pretty quick. My fastest locks were in the Erie Canal at 17 minutes. My slowest again was in the Mississippi at an hour and 6 average. Well, let's go look at the map and kind of look at it mile by mile. Let's just go to the start. Okay, here we are at the start. I decided to set up right here because I wanted to do a direct crossing, and Pensacola was the place. I drove out to the fort and did my pre-announcement, which I think's got like 2.7 million views now. It really amazed me. I think people started, when they got excited, they were going back to look at my videos. But I started out of there, and I waited. I think we started looking at weather window around the 9th. We went out on the 12th, and because we had a window that looked like I could get across there without too much hassle. So started that run during the middle of that trip, I was approximately 100 miles offshore. Now, I know that was concerning a lot of y'all guys, but again, this is one of the calmest periods of the year, and I had done a lot of planning to make sure that I got a great weather window, and I could have always bailed out, but this was a run that saved me a lot of time because previous record holders had actually kind of followed the armpit around, and it took a couple of days to get here where I was able to knock it out in one day. So my first night was in the bay west of Fort Myers. Talk about one miserable night. I'd heard about these horrible mosquitoes that they have there in Florida that could get through a mosquito net. I believe them. I think I got 2 hours sleep that night and decided to bail on out to be at the first lock on the Okeechobee just as it was opening. My first fuel stop after crossing the entire state of Florida in about 6 hours was at Stuart, Florida. I got in and out of there quickly. It's about a 30-minute fuel stop. And then the second night, I went out in the ocean, in the Atlantic, and made a beeline over to Cape Canaveral. Along the way, I did encounter a thunderstorm, and I ended up hugging the bank and hit some riprap that someone had put out to preserve the beach. And I didn't damage the motor or the boat, but I did damage my autopilot where it connected to the boat. I broke the little post, and so I did have someone meet me at Cape Canaveral, and we worked on that for a couple hours, and thought we had it all figured out, but we didn't. So that second night there, I was at a public boat dock. I did not get a lot of sleep because during two officers woke me up during the night, and then the fishermen started showing up at the break of dawn or before, so I bailed on out of there pretty early. My plan was to do a direct crossing from Cape Canaveral to Bald Head, North Carolina, and that did not work out. I wasted about 2 hours working on the autopilot, and then finally made a decision to just release all the wiring because I was getting some shorts being out there in the salt water. But the plan was to run all the way to Bald Head, North Carolina. And what happened is during the night, a low pressure system formed up over here and then moved offshore. I didn't know it because I forgot to check the weather that morning. But once I got into the Gulf Stream, this line here, you basically lines the Gulf Stream. I hit that current, and I had like a 4 mile an hour current, and I was doing great. And shortly after that, I started hitting thunderstorms off in the distance, and the waves started building, and I had to make a decision to bail out of my route, not knowing what was going on. And I got into Jacksonville very late. So I think it was like 2 in the morning or something I got in there. And so I didn't want to camp at another boat dock. So I kind of wandered around and found a good place here to drop anchor. Got a really good night's sleep. I slept late that morning. I think I slept till almost 9 o'clock, and I know people were getting worried, but I really needed some rest, which would show up later, me not getting a lot of sleep. So I got up in the morning. I didn't know exactly where I was going to go. I went down here, was looking for a marina to get some fuel and do some repairs because I broke my seat during the night, and had some hopes of maybe fixing my autopilot. So I got in here at the fuel dock, and we worked on the boat, and I ended up being there a long time, which I lost some time there. That's where I refueled there. That was my second refuel, and then I headed north. So the fourth night, we headed up into Georgia. A lot of wiggling. and a lot of what they call sounds. And a sound is just a big old opening to the sea that you've got to cross. And the waves are just almost as big as in the ocean. But so I had to cross a lot of those, and some of those were pretty tough. But on my fourth night, I got to a place kind of in the middle of nowhere. It was wonderful. It did rain that night, so I ended up dropping my bimini top and setting up my storm tent, and cost me a little bit of time, but I slept dry that night and got a pretty good night's sleep. But I was still on a deficit from those first couple of nights. So then we headed north, and the next thing was going to be a refuel, and that was going to be just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. And we picked up fuel there. Graciously, a guy bought my fuel, and I was like, "You realize this is going to be hundreds of dollars?" And he said, "Yes, I want to be part of your trip." And that I was starting to get the idea that a lot of people were kind of globbing on. We had a number of boats follow us in, and the police department escorted us through Charleston, and so yeah, the viral aspect of the trip was starting to go. There, the nicest lady and some other people gave me food and a couple of really good sandwiches. So as I was heading out of there and crossing a bunch of swamps, I was munching on those sandwiches, and then I think everyone knows what's happened. You can see all these like swampy areas. There's no one there. I was in the middle of nowhere, and I fell asleep and I ran ashore. I'll zoom in on where I ran ashore here. Um, so the tide was out a little bit, so there was a cut bank right on that shoreline, and I hit that bank. These are my actual lines where I went. This is taken right off my GPS, and I hit that cut bank and had to lift up just loaded with fuel, so I had a lot of weight on the boat, and I ended up going 45 feet into the grass and stuff after jumping that cliff. I imagine my boat flew through the air. I woke up and I was in the front of the boat. My chart plotter was damaged, but the boat had a few cracks here and there, but it was still runnable. And I knew I was going to need to get a new chart plotter just for safety. And so I called my team. They got some people out to help me. Within 3 hours, I was on my way and headed to my fifth night location. I'm running all this, most of this at night, and I pull into behind this island, found a great place to camp, and that next morning, bright and early, a guy came by and who was following the trip and greeted me as I was folding up my sleeping gear. I got to sleep under the stars that night. It was a good night. Then when I got up, I headed over to the Bass Pro Shop in Myrtle Beach. Probably the most famous video of the trip was a guy filmed it as I got a ride into the Bass Pro Shop, which was right over here, and happened to get like a $1,100 Go 9 Simrad chart plotter that they had on closeout promotion for $599. It was a really good deal. But I got back in, and you'll see a line where I go up and back. I had to go back and make a few adjustments. It wasn't a big deal. So headed out, and the sixth night. On the sixth night, I mean, I made it a long way that day, which I did run into the night, but I was watching offshore conditions as well as my team helping me, and we just could not get back offshore, so I had to go inside. And there is this way to avoid going around Cape Hatteras. It's called the Pamlico Sound here. And I would have liked to have gone around, but this area gets really dicey right here off Cape Hatteras. And Pamlico Sound isn't a lot better. It's a big body of water. But I came in at night and the wind had laid some, and I went ahead and got some sleep here. It was pretty good sleep. So the next morning, things were calming down. Offshore was calming down. It was time to get back offshore, but I needed to find a place to get back offshore. So I headed to Oregon Inlet. Again, I had charts or routes plotted for all this, and I'd lost my routes when I damaged my chart plotter. So what I ended up doing is making a wrong turn here and probably went a mile and a half or two out of my way. I asked a charter captain, waved him down, and he goes, "Oh yeah, you went past it. Just follow me." So I followed him on back, and he showed me right where the marina was, and he was taking a group offshore fishing. So it was one of my slower fuel stops. This because they were kind of slow getting everything going there, but I got back in and headed back offshore out of Oregon Inlet. Made a long run. I had some thunderstorms that afternoon, so you will see I had a little bit wiggly course getting around some weather, but made a pretty good run. So I had hoped to go all the way to New York. Speed wasn't as fast as I had hoped, so it was getting to be about 9:30, and I said, "There's no way." So I headed over to Ocean City, Maryland, and as I hit the jetties there were hundreds of people greeting me as I came in several boats. And one of them says, "Well, man, we've got a 105-foot yacht you can stay on tonight." And I said, "Okay, let's do it." So I followed them into this marina, and it was going to rain that night. So this was like a godsend. I didn't have to take down my bimini and set up my storm tent. I just parked there. They had a slip I could park in. We walked around over here, and I slept in this boat right here. It was called Cookie Monster. Great night's sleep. Got to sleep in a bed, got to get a shower, and I think I was out of there by 5 a.m. It worked out really well. So next morning, I got up and headed for New York. Had a fairly significant open water crossing, and then I was able to follow the shoreline into New York Harbor and right to the Statue of Liberty. Can you believe? I mean, I was tingling all over. Here I am, and guys, there's the Statue of Liberty. I took some pictures. I think I spent 4 minutes taking pictures of me in the boat and the motor, and several selfies of the Statue of Liberty. It was pretty exciting. And then I ran over to Manhattan Island, and it was so cool. If you can believe it, as I ran along Manhattan Island here, along the Battery, there were people lining up the sidewalks, yelling, "Go Robert, go Robert!" And I thought this was a Southern thing. No, it was in New York. There were crowds up there yelling to go. So it had really started to become a viral event at that point. So from there, I headed up the Hudson to my 8th night. And my goal was to stage that night where I could get up in the morning and be waiting at the Federal Lock in Troy so I could get into the Erie Canal as early as possible. I met some bow fishermen that night, and they told me where this really good camping spot was. It was fantastic. When I got up in the morning, about the time I got right here, there was a towboat coming by, and he says, "Well, pull on over here. I'll get you a cup of coffee." So it was really neat. I just pulled my boat up beside that tug, and they passed me a cup of coffee. Everyone was so generous and helpful during the trip. So next, we headed to Federal Lock, and I was there to Troy, New York, just as it was opening. And by this point, all the lock masters were following me. They knew I was coming, so basically I drove green lighted right into the lock. This was my 6th lock, I think, after 5 on the Okeechobee. And many people consider this the first of the Erie Canal locks. It's really not, because it's on the Hudson, but you just go a little ways up, and right up here, and then the next thing you know, you're turning into the Erie Canal. And when I got to this first lock here, They call this the Waterford Step. There's 5 locks right in a row. There were like 400 people lined up around that lock. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. I got to visit with the crowd while we were going up. And Skipper Jack with the American Great Loop Cruisers Association, he's a harbor host. And really nice guy, was very helpful with me up there. Speaking of Skipper Jack, the next thing I did was refueled at the Schenectady club. I think it was like 7 or 8 locks in, and that's Jack's home club right here. And pulled up to the fuel dock. I was in and out of there in no time. I used their public restroom there by the boat dock, which was wonderful, and headed on out. I was hoping to get quite a way, but they had some issues with the locks in the Erie Canal from a flood, and I got caught at lock 16. If I'd have been there like 30 minutes earlier, I would have got to move on through, and that would have gotten me to some locks that opened later, and I could have made a lot more headway. But I got there 20 minutes after they had closed the locks for the day and ended up camping here. It gave me like 15 hours till the locks opened, so I did do some electrical work. I was having lots of wiring problems from running all that ocean and running through those storms, but I pretty much got all my wiring problems fixed up here. So the next thing I did was made my way toward Lake Oneida, and I had contacted Tohatsu, and they had oil waiting for me right at that bridge, and I came over here to this marina, and they offered to change my oil for me. Just the nicest people. And the president of the Great Loop Cruisers Association happened to be in her boat there, and I got to meet Kim, and really nice. I got to meet the marina owner, and I had a parade of boats following me there. And what was really cool is as I crossed Lake Oneida, it's shallow and pretty wide. You know, most people run down the middle, but it was really windy that day, and a guy on a personal watercraft said, "Hey, let's run the north bank, and I'll run you and get you to avoid all the shallows." And we ran here and were able to go full throttle following that north bank, and got me into Brewerton in no time. I think the total time on that oil change was like less than 20 minutes, and I was on to Camp 10. This was my second and last night. I only spent 2 nights in the Erie Canal, and made it a good way. Since there was no one moving, I just slept right in the middle of the river here, dropped my anchor, and there was a crowd of people when I woke up in the morning. There's some really beautiful pictures taken here. There was some fog, and a big old tugboat was passing right behind me as I was waking up. I don't have time to tell all the stories during this video, but someday I'm going to produce a comprehensive video where I tell all the stories, and there was some fun stuff occurred right here. Now we're heading out of the Erie Canal and heading toward the Great Lakes. I made the Erie Canal, and I think I exited the Erie around 5 o'clock, and I got to Long Point in Canadian waters. It was just shortly after dark. I think it was like 8 o'clock, and I anchored out on this side of this point because the wind was blowing fairly significantly as a tailwind, and so I was protected from the wind here. But I knew that there could be a wind change, and I needed to be aware of it. So I went ahead and dropped anchor, set up my camp and everything. I was able to camp under the stars that night. I didn't have to set up my foul weather tent, which takes some extra time. But yeah, I think it was around 11:30 or midnight. The wind started changing to the direct south, and I wasn't protected, and the waves were building. And I had to get up around 1 o'clock in the morning, and I ended up having to move my boat about 17 miles. It took me 2 hours to do this, but I ended up moving to the other side of the point and got up in a cove here to where I was protected, and I spent the rest of the night there. And I slept a little bit late because that run around here in the shallow water was scary a little bit. And it was kind of cool with the high wind and the cooler weather up there. But got in there, got a great night's sleep in that protected cove, and then headed to the Detroit River. I was running right along the Canadian border, and boats were popping out from Canada and visiting with me and following along. When I made it into the Detroit River, there were like 50 boats lined up waiting, and we had a huge parade of boats going through the Detroit River. And I took the opportunity to go ahead and refuel there, and that worked out well to set me up for my next long run. So we headed into Lake St. Clair and then up the St. Clair River. And I ended up stopping in Canada at a little harbor there and got me some sleep and then headed on into Lake Huron. Lake Huron was really nice, but there was a cold front getting ready to move in from the west that was going to kick up some really heavy rain and really high winds. And my router Jack told me you need to get off that lake by about 11:30, 11:45. So that's what I did, and I got in there and we secured my boat. We tied it with 4 lines and into a docking area, and the winds came in 40, 50 miles an hour. Thank goodness I wasn't on that lake. It's really nice to have a router when you're solo, kind of warning you about things. You got to listen to him first, and you got to check in regularly. But no, he saved my skin there. It was a great opportunity. A lot of people wondered why my route, my tracker was going all over the place. Well, we went into town and I bought some supplies, and we went and got a world's largest ice cream cone and had dinner, and so met some people that gave me some rides around. It was a really nice stay there at Grist Mill. But I got up at 5 o'clock the next morning. I was beginning to be worried that I might be missing my solo and single engine record. But, I wasn't going to let that slow me down. At least I was going to get a John Boat record, so I was going to give it everything I got. So I departed, and I was ready to get into Lake Michigan. But, man, I had a rough day. I had headwinds with 3-foot waves, and I just kept trudging along. I went into the first harbor to get fuel. They had just closed their fuel dock at 5, and I think I was there at 5:30. And so I said, heck, let me analyze my fuel. And I had enough to make it a ways down the east coast of Lake Michigan. So I just kept headed on. So I made it under the bridge into Lake Michigan, and the weather was pretty good. So I just headed out and was able to take pretty much a straight line to my next campsite for my 14th night. And it was super nice. I'll zoom in on it. It was I think it's called South Manitou Island. Had a really beautiful crescent harbor. It was a weekend, so there were other boats there, and several people came over in their dinghy and said hello, and that told me they were following me. It was pretty nice. It was a really good night rest there. But that's where I realized beating all those waves on Lake Huron had opened up a crack in my boat, and I was taking on a bit of water that night. Nothing that I had 3 bilge pumps, nothing that my bilge pumps couldn't handle, but it shook me up a little bit, and I could have run the rest of the trip with the leak I had. It wasn't a big deal, but it did, shake my confidence a little. So I headed out the next morning. And it was pretty good, but Jack had told me that in the afternoon it could get bad, and I was seeing some bad weather off in the distance, and I said, Jack, I think it's time to pull in, and since we are getting in this early, we may have the opportunity to do some work on the boat that's leaking. So I got off not because I was having problems with the boat. I got off because of weather conditions. So I pulled in there and that night, and we took it over to a shop and did some welding on it. It was kind of messy. It was hard to weld on. You had to get it clean enough, but we're able to get it tacked together with weld and some JB weld to get it where I felt a lot more confident with the boat, and I was ready to hop back out there. And thank goodness I was there because the weather that day was horrible out in the Great Lakes and Lake Michigan, and got some sleep. Didn't get a lot because I was working on the boat till about 12:30, and I got up at I think 5 or 5:30 the next morning. But put it in the water again. I did my 8th refuel of gas there, and was going to head to Chicago. It was like a total of I think 260 miles to Chicago, and I was concerned about it, but it worked. I got to that point and I called Jack. He said, Robert, the weather is perfect. You can do a straight run into Chicago. And I was like 35, 40 miles offshore, coming right down the throat of Lake Michigan, and I was able to run full throttle the whole way. I made it into the into the river there, and that first night is kind of a famous night. I pulled in there, just dropped my anchor. It was like it was kind of late, 9:30, 10, and some people came over from this road right here, and I could see their lights, and they were yelling, "Hey, go Robert! We're glad to see you." And it was a lot of fun. I was, laying out my sleeping pad, my sleeping bag, and stuff. And those 2 different cars, they came and went, and I was just getting ready to lay down, and some guys came crashing through the brush right here. And they go, hey, Robert, hey, Robert. And I said, yeah, it's me. And that's where it was a fireman and a policeman threw me a Chicago hot dog and roast beef sandwich. It was a great conversation. It lasted for 30 minutes, and they recorded on video. If you can find that video, it is one of the funniest videos you'll ever see. But I had a great big old Chicago style hot dog and got a great night's sleep, and my spirits were great. And what it did is when I made that incredible crossing across Lake Michigan, I started having hope. There was hope again to get a record. So now during this day, I was headed down the Illinois River, and I was going to meet Quentin, my strategist, and he met up with me, and met him just after refueling here, and headed on down toward Grafton for the 17th night. And I was running with Quentin into there, and we got in there pretty late at night. It's maybe 10:30. It was a weekend. There was a rocking party going on there, and lots of people at the dock welcoming Quentin and I in. And a lady offered to put us up in her house that was right over here on top of this hill, right there. We stayed in that house. It had a view of the Illinois River, the Mississippi River, and a glass elevator that took you up to the 3rd floor. It was just outstanding. What a wonderful night. I went straight to bed, and Quentin stayed up and visited with our host for a while. But we got up at 5 o'clock in the morning. We had someone waiting for us, and we're back on the water. I refueled there, and so we were rested and refueled and headed on out. So now we're heading down the Mississippi River. We got hung up at Alton, but I ended up making it all the way to up the Ohio, up the Tennessee, and into the Kentucky River that night. It was a heck of a long run, and this was at a state park. Some people offered to put me up in a hotel room, so I took them up. It was very efficient. I got in there, took me right to the hotel room, got to sleep. They were waiting for me at 6 o'clock in the morning. I did take the opportunity to refuel here again, and I think it's called Paris Landing on Kentucky Lake, and went very quickly. I got through the locks, and I actually had a boat with really nice lights on that were locals escort me all the way from the dam to there, and I think it was about a 60-mile run at night. And then so the next day was we refueled there, and the next stop was another refuel, and so we had made it onto the Tenn-Tom Canal, and this is Midway Marina. I'd made it to the lock just below Midway Marina, and they said they were going to be held up for a few minutes. And I'd asked them about gas. They said, "Man, just run back up a few miles or a mile and a half, and get your gas up there. And by the time you get it, we'll have the lock open and ready for you." It worked out really good. The marina owner bought my fuel. Super nice. I'd met him at the dam. Didn't realize he was the marina owner, and he gave me a hat from his marina. And it's really cool crowd. There was 6 or 7 boats hanging out there at the lock when I came in. But once I got through that refuel, I headed on down, and man, it's looking really possible. But it's going to be close. It's going to be hour by hour if I'm going to beat the record. But I ran late that night. Again, I ran into some people that had some lights, and they ran ahead of me and got me to this location. As I was dropping anchor, a couple of guys pulled in there and just wanted to say hi. And they said, "Well, what's your plan?" I said, "Well, I'm going to leave out really early. I'm going to have to go kind of slow because my spotlight got damaged while I was out there in the ocean." This guy says, "Well, I just bought a new one. You can have it." I said, "No, let me pay for it." And he says, "No, I want to be part of your trip." So he handed me this really nice spotlight, and I got up at like 4:30 in the morning. Didn't get a lot of sleep that night, but I knew I was going to have to push it if I was going to get the record, because I had a lot of river, several locks, and a bay to run. So I headed off for the bay and the Intercoastal Canal. That was a lot of river to run on that last day to try and get a record. Had a rough crossing on that bay. I was getting 3-4 foot waves out on the bay, but I finally made it into the Intercoastal. Right here, there must have been 100 boats waiting. In the Gulf Shores, Alabama, there were helicopters flying over. It was reeling and rocking, man. It was a blast. Finally, I had enough fuel left, and I headed right to the finish line. I didn't know it, but my family and the guys from Tohatsu were in a big old yacht following me, and my wife and my nephew and his wife and kids, and made it to the finish line. And I broke the record by about 6 hours, 19 days, 13 hours, and 1 minute to cross my line. It was pretty amazing. It's still hard for me to look back and think how amazing it was and how many people I got to share a lot of joy with on the banks. But guys, I appreciate y'all's interest in this, and I hope y'all had as much fun looking at this video as I just had making it for you. We'll see you next Sunday.